If one day your own family, the people who are supposed to love you the most, made fun of you in front of the whole world, what would you do? Today's story begins with a letter sent to the wrong name, a cruel joke, and a girl being called by a name she never chose for herself. Plain Clara, the ugly daughter of the Whitmore family. One spring afternoon in 1887, in a small house in Missouri, amid the snickers of the sisters, a mail-order bride application was sent, not with love, but with irony. No one expected that the joke would take Clara to the wilds of Montana, where the wind was bitterly cold, but warmer than any place she had ever lived. There, she met Jacob Rourke, a widower, wealthy, but as cold and silent as the land he ruled. One did not believe in love, and one had never been loved. Could they find each other in this land of prejudice? And if it were you sent away as cargo, would you have the courage to board the train and start your life over today? Join me in following that girl's journey, a journey of vulnerability, kindness, and love that blossoms from the ashes. If this story makes you feel a little warm in the cold days, don't forget to like, share the video, and subscribe to the channel to continue listening to the healing stories in that remote borderland. A chilly, early-season wind crept along the Silver Creek Valley as the train slowly pulled into the small station. The sound of metal grinding against the rails was long and dry, as if the earth itself were holding its breath before an unplanned encounter. As the coal smoke dissipated in the pale afternoon, a young woman stepped from the train, clutching a frayed wooden suitcase. Her name was Evelyn Hart, about 27 years old, so thin and plain that one could easily miss her at a glance. On her old coat, a small piece of cloth at the collar was frayed, carefully mended with neat stitches, under the dusty woolen scarf. Her eyes shone with a strange light, not joy, but a fragile belief that she was about to start a new life. The words Silver Creek Station gleamed in the late afternoon sun on the old wooden sign of the station. In the distance, the blue-gray mountains seemed to swallow the sky. Horse-drawn carriages and women in coarse brown dresses holding children passed her by. Everything was unfamiliar, but also peaceful in the way of the frontier where man and nature coexisted between harshness and hope. Evelyn took a deep breath, her chest tightening in her sweater. She had traveled more than 800 miles from Missouri, carrying only a letter and a promise. The writer was Charles Whitmore, a Silver Creek rancher, a widower with 2 small children. They had been writing to each other for 3 months short, slow, spare letters, but filled with something Evelyn had never felt in her life, respect. I am not looking for a beautiful woman. I need someone who can keep the roof over my head, he wrote. Evelyn had read that line 100 times on the train across the border. She wasn't sure if it was love, but at least it was an invitation to step out of the darkness. As she stepped off the platform, a black carriage stopped at the curb. In the front seat sat a man in his 40s, broad-shouldered, tanned, with ash-brown eyes, Charles Whitmore. He wore a gray flannel coat and a wide-brimmed hat, his demeanor calm, but his gaze uncertain. Beside him sat an elderly woman, her hair tied back, her face icy, Martha Whitmore, Charles's mother. Evelyn bowed slightly. "Madam, sir, I am Evelyn Hart." Mrs. Whitmore did not answer at once. She looked her up and down, her gaze quick and sharp as a knife. "You are the one in the letter." Her voice was hoarse and cold. "Yes, ma'am," Evelyn replied, her voice low but unshaken. Charles nodded slightly, his eyes warming slightly. Get in the car. It's a long way home, he said, patting the side of the car. As she left town, a silver wind blew through the dry sagebrush. Montana lay before her vast, harsh, but breathtakingly beautiful. Evelyn sat still, her hand on her suitcase, looking out at the desert plains stretching to the foothills. The sun was setting, dyeing the sky crimson, like her heart silent, patient, waiting for a start. In the space filled with only the sound of horse hooves, Mrs. Martha suddenly spoke, breaking the silence. "Have you ever done farm work?" Miss Hart Evelyn nodded slightly. "I grew up in a small town, used to cooking and sewing. Ma'am, I hope you're strong enough to survive the winter here," she said, her voice laced with wariness. Charles glanced at his mother, then said softly, "Mom, she has come a long way to get here, but Mrs. Whitmore only responded with a slight sigh, as if a breeze had just passed. As the carriage crossed the wooden bridge, Whitmore Farm came into view, a large wooden house in the middle of a valley, surrounded by pine trees and wind-worn fences. A horse neighed in the distance, and children's laughter drifted from the porch. Evelyn suddenly tightened her grip on her suitcase. She had never really had a place she could call home. Mrs. Martha stepped down first, saying in a low voice, "Your room is on the upper floor at the end of the hall. Get up early tomorrow morning. Greta will show you how to cook." Charles was silent the whole time. When their eyes met, he only said softly, "Thank you for coming." A short sentence, but to Evelyn, it was as warm as embers on a snowy night. That night, when she opened her bedroom window, the wind blew through the cracks in the boards, carrying with it the smell of pine and cold snow. In the distance, a yellow light shone from the kitchen, where Martha sat sewing by the fireplace. The crackling of the wood crackled steadily. Evelyn put down her suitcase, touched the rough cotton pillow, and smiled. However cold Mrs. Whitmore's gaze, at least this place offered her a roof. The night in the Silver Creek was unusually quiet. There was only the wind against the windows and the chirping of insects in the pines. Evelyn lay still, thinking of her dead mother, the long train ride, and the short letters. In that silence, she knew she could never go back. All she had was tomorrow and the strangers in this house. As the moonlight fell on her hand, illuminating the worn silver ring she had worn throughout the journey, Evelyn thought to herself, "If this isn't where I'll be loved, then at least I'll learn to live decently here." She closed her eyes, feeling her heart beat slowly, in sync with the wind. Outside, the dark mountains loomed like giants guarding the secrets of this land, a place where strangers came to start over, or to be forgiven. And as the first dawn broke over the Silver Creek Mountains, Evelyn knew little that her real challenge lay not in the cold or the hard labor, but in making a cold home warm again. The first morning in Silver Creek began with the distant crowing of a woodcock and a weak light filtering through the sheer curtains. Evelyn woke with a cold mist on her breath. Her small room cast a dim light on the rough wooden walls, the grain of the wood showing like the scars of the house. On the floor, her dusty shoes lay neatly as they had the night before. From the kitchen came the faint smell of toast and coffee. She slowly tied her hair back, adjusted her collar, and walked down the stairs. The kitchen was dimly lit, filled with the sizzle of pans and the tap of spoons on pots. Martha Whitmore stood by the stove, tall and stern in her gray apron, not turning when she heard footsteps. "You're up early," she said, her voice flat and emotionless. Evelyn nodded slightly. "I think I should start getting used to the rhythm here." She pointed to the dining table breakfast for 6. "Please help clear it up." Evelyn obeyed, gently setting out each plate and each glass of milk. When she placed the 5th bowl, she noticed that there was still an empty seat at the head of the table, a chair reserved for Mr. Samuel Whitmore, whom she had not yet met. Martha's late husband had been dead for many years, and his younger brother, Samuel, was in charge of the farm's finances. He was said to be a stern and practical man, a man concerned only with money and honor. The large door opened. The wind rushed in, carrying with it dust and the smell of hay. Charles Whitmore entered, followed by his 2 small children, Abigail and James. His face was dusty, but his gaze toward his children was strangely gentle. When his eyes met Evelyn's, he only nodded, like a good morning, brief, polite, but enough to make her heart skip a beat. Just then, Mr. Samuel appeared tall, broad-shouldered, with a silver beard, and the piercing eyes of a man accustomed to commanding others by his gaze. He sat down at the head of the table without saying hello. "Are you new?" he asked dryly. "Yes, sir. Evelyn Hart, mail-order bride." He raised his eyebrows. Charles replied softly, "She is my wife, Samuel." There was a moment of silence. Martha set the coffee pot down on the table with a slight clink as a warning. "Let's eat," she said, her voice cold. Breakfast was eaten in a tense silence. The sharp click of knives and forks against plates was audible. Only the 2 children giggled, asking trivial questions like, "Does Evelyn like apples?" or "Does it snow like this in Missouri?" And it was these innocent questions that were the only warmth in the heavy wooden room. "Mrs." Martha looked up and looked at Evelyn. "Here. Everyone works. No one comes just to live off. I hope you understand." Evelyn bowed her head. "I understand, ma'am. I'm not good at anything big, but I know how to keep a house in order." That did not lighten the mood. Mr. Samuel smirked. "In the West, people don't need neatness. They need strength." The words made Evelyn feel a lump in her throat. But she didn't react, just quietly clearing her plate when the meal was over, like an old habit from her previous life where she had learned to survive in silence. At noon, she followed Greta, the elderly maid, out to the stables. The wind blew across the fields, carrying the scent of hay and horse sweat. Greta was quiet, but her eyes were kind. "Don't let the mistress see you're free," she whispered. "They don't believe in the kindness of strangers here." Evelyn smiled. "I don't believe in my own goodness either, but maybe I still want to try." Greta looked at her and nodded slightly. "Maybe that's why you're still here." The afternoon sun beat down on the roof. Martha sat sewing on the porch, Samuel doing his accounting in the living room. Charles led the horse back to the stable, as quiet as the valley itself. Evelyn washed her hands and prepared dinner. The sound of knives cutting meat, ladles banging on pots mingled with the warmth of the kitchen. Though tired, she felt at peace. At least today no one would chase her away. In the evening, the family sat around the long dining table. Dinner was more crowded than in the morning, but not for her. Mr. Samuel talked about the low price of the cattle market. Mrs. Martha worried about the slow harvest. Charles was quiet, occasionally reminding the 2 children to finish their food. Evelyn sat at the end of the table, spoon in hand, watching the candlelight dance on the tabletop. One time, Abigail accidentally spilled milk. Martha frowned, about to scold, but Evelyn was quick to wipe it up with a towel. "It's all right, dear," she said softly. Her voice, kind and gentle, silenced the room. Even Charles looked up. But when Martha saw it, she only chuckled coldly. "Gentleness doesn't keep a farm. Miss Hart, one has to be tough here." Evelyn nodded, not arguing. "Perhaps so, ma'am, but perhaps someone needs to keep this house laughing." The words caused a pause in the air for a few seconds. Then Mr. Samuel chuckled, as if he had just heard a silly story. Evelyn lowered her head and continued eating, her heart heavy as lead. Night fell. When everyone was asleep, she sat by the attic window. Outside, the wind howled through the pines. The moon hung in the silver sky. The moonlight reflected on her hand, pale as a reminder she was only a stranger in this house, a household object, as people used to call her in her hometown. But this time, in the silence, Evelyn did not cry. She just looked up at the distant mountains, where the snow lay like a giant white blanket, and whispered, "Just need a place to be seen. Just one place." She closed the window, and the oil lamp cast her shadow on the wall, long and lonely. But in that darkness, something quietly burned the gentle determination of a woman who does not wait to be loved, but learns to love first. And perhaps it was in the silence of those early days that fate began to weave its small threads leading Evelyn to her first trials, where she would have to choose between fear and faith. One late autumn afternoon, a silver wind blew across the wide meadows of Silver Creek, carrying the scent of wood smoke and dry leaves. Evelyn was hanging towels on the porch when Greta returned from town, carrying a small cloth bag. She placed it on the wooden table and sighed. "There's a letter from Bozeman Station. Your name is Miss Hart?" Evelyn paused. Letters were seldom written on the frontier unless they were important. She wiped her hands and slowly opened the envelope. The ink was lightly faded, the handwriting masculine, neat and composed. "I'm not a romantic, but I can give you respect and a place to belong. Charles Whitmore." She stood still. The letter had come late, but just when her heart was at its most uncertain. For 3 months, Evelyn had been working nonstop, trying to find her place in this strange house. And yet, with just a few lines, he had brought back the feeling she had had in the first place, the reason she had left Missouri to be seen. Greta tilted her head. Curious. A letter from the boss. Evelyn folded it up, her voice almost a whisper. Yes, it was one of his letters. I thought I had forgotten it. Greta smiled, a gentle smile. There are things that don't need to be reread to remember. They live in us. That evening, during dinner, Mrs. Martha received a package from the post office. Evelyn helped open it, and inside were some balls of yarn and some newspapers from the East. When she turned to the middle page, Mrs. Whitmore's gaze paused, her lips curled slightly, half smirking, half scornful. "Oh, look," she said, "there's something about mail-order brides. They say some people send pictures, not hearts." Mr. Samuel laughed dryly. In this day and age, only desperate men buy wives with envelopes. Cold laughter rang out, making the atmosphere of the meal heavy. Evelyn was silent, her hands clutching her napkin. "And you, Miss Hart," said Mr. Samuel, "must have been a strange fate to have chosen to come here." Martha lowered her voice. Or should we not choose, and have someone choose for us? The words silenced the table. Evelyn looked up, her soft brown eyes shining in the lamplight. "I came for a letter, for the promise that somewhere there is a home waiting for me." Charles, who had been silent all this time, looked up slightly between the clatter of spoons on plates. He looked at her and said very softly, but clearly, "And I have never forgotten that promise." After dinner, when everyone had gone upstairs, Martha sat sewing by the light of a kerosene lamp, her eyes still sharp. She remembered the photograph that had accompanied the mail-order dossier from the previous year, the one of Evelyn, taken before her hair could be fixed, the sunlight slanting down half her face, tired and honest. It was that photograph that had prompted Charles to write back. Though he did not believe in fate, the world is full of jokes. Charles, she once told her son, "Don't let a strange woman ruin our family's reputation." But Charles simply replied, "I don't seek honor, Mother, I seek peace." She doesn't understand, and probably never wants to understand. Meanwhile, upstairs, Evelyn sat by the window, reopening her little diary. The pages were worn, the corners yellowed. She wrote, "I still don't know why I was chosen. Maybe it was a joke, or maybe someone sent me the wrong way. But in this big world, who would send their whole life by mistake?" The night wind crept through the crack in the door, carrying the sound of the distant stream, murmuring like an answer. Evelyn remembered the day in Missouri when her older sister, Violet, always the favorite of their mother, had giggled when she saw the newspaper at Widow Farmer, 36 seeks humble and honest companion, address Silver Creek, Montana Territory, perfect for you. Plain Clara, Violet said, half jokingly. Evelyn had only smiled wryly, thinking it was a joke. But a few weeks later, the reply arrived. Violet happily showed off to the whole family. He actually replied and sent the train fare. "Look at this, I am not a romantic man, but I can offer you security, respect, and a place to belong." The whole house laughed, but Evelyn stood still. Her hands trembled as she touched the paper, a strange feeling rising in her, not of embarrassment, but of being seen, even if only through an old photograph. Now, in the cold cabin, she realized that joke was the turning point of her life. Without it, she would still be plain Clara, a forgotten woman in a corner of Missouri. But thanks to a cruel joke, she had a chance to live, to love, to test whether her heart could still beat. Evelyn closed the diary and said softly, like a prayer, "If this is a mistake, let it be the best mistake of my life." She turned off the light, letting the silver moonlight wash over her face. Outside, Silver Creek was silent under the stars, and somewhere in the darkness of the valley, a lamp still burned the light of a man who had written, "I'm not a romantic, but I can give you a place to belong." And it is from that cruel joke that Evelyn's true journey begins, where she must learn to believe what she never believed, that sometimes fate chooses us, even when we dare not choose ourselves. News of the second letter arrived on a gray morning, when the Missouri sky was covered with a thick layer of ash. The doorbell rang long and loud in the Wynn family's old house, followed by an eerie silence. Evelyn, then still named Clara, Wynn was tending the fire in the kitchen when she heard her father's hoarse, heavy voice calling from the living room, "Clara, come out here. Explain this to me." The letter lay on the table, sealed with red wax, the seal of Iron Creek Ranch, Montana Territory. The father, Mr. Samuel Wynn, held it in his hand, his face red with anger. Beside it, Clara's 3 sisters stood huddled together, half curious, half amused, and her mother, Margaret, fidgeted in a corner, holding the unfinished embroidery in her trembling hands. Clara stepped back, trying to keep her voice calm. "I don't know. Father, don't you know, Mr. Wynne slammed the letter down on the table. "A strange man sent fare all the way here, saying he would marry you. If the whole town knew about this, how would they be able to face it?" The room suddenly became thick. The crackling of wood in the fireplace was a sarcastic remark. Violet, the eldest sister, chuckled. "I just thought it would be a little fun." Who would have thought he was so sincere? Clara turned to her sister, eyes wide. "You are the one who sent the application." Violet shrugged. "I never dared to dream." "Clara, maybe you can just help me dream." The whole house laughed. The laughter mingled with the wind outside, dry and hollow. Clara felt her nose sting, but she did not cry. She just looked down at the letter, saw the neat handwriting, each letter sure as if written by the hand of someone who had suffered more than spoken. "I'm not a romantic, but I can give you respect and a place to belong." She read the line a second time, and a third time. The more she read, the more her heart trembled, not with love, but with faith. A stranger, in that faraway place, had written to her what no one in this house had ever said. That evening, when everyone was asleep, Clara sat alone in the kitchen, with only the light of a single oil lamp on the wall. On the table, the second letter was still open, and inside was a small piece of paper train fare to Bozeman Station next month. She took the note, her hand trembling slightly. It was not just an invitation, but a way out. A narrow window leading out of the obscure years where she was known only as plain Clara. In her head, her father's voice echoed again. "You are a burden. Clara, in this house, everyone knows their place." She sighed softly. Perhaps her place was no longer here. The next morning, as everyone was having breakfast, Mr. Wynne said curtly, "I'll write a letter of rejection. Enough jokes." Clara did not reply. She stood up and poured her father more coffee, moving slowly and evenly. Then she said softly, almost in a whisper, "I will go, Father." The table fell silent. Her mother dropped her spoon. Violet stifled a laugh, her eyes wide with surprise. "What did you say, Mr.?" Wynne roared. Clara raised her head, her voice low but firm. "I will go. He wrote the letter with my name on it. If this is a joke, I will be the one to end it." The father jumped up and slammed his hand on the table. "You're crazy. What will people think of this house?" Clara looked straight at him, her eyes sparkling but determined. "I've lived my whole life afraid of what people think. Father, now, I just want to know if there's a place where people really see me for who I am." No one said another word. There was only the sound of the morning wind blowing through the window, gently rustling the old curtains. That afternoon, Clara packed her things. Only her mother stood by the door, her eyes red. "Are you sure, Clara? It's tough out there. People don't know what kindness is." Clara smiled, placing her warm hand on her mother's. "I've never seen kindness here before. Mother, maybe I want to find out for myself what it looks like." She hugged her and said with a trembling voice, "You are just like your mother, always choosing the path no one else chooses." Clara replied softly, "If you believe in anything, please believe that I will live well." That evening, she stood outside the yard, looking at the distant train tracks. The cold moonlight shone down on the sparkling tracks, like two silver streaks leading to another land. In her hand was a small suitcase. Inside were only a few old clothes, a diary, and a letter. Violet walked out, still wearing her luxurious sweater, her mouth half smiling, half disdainful. "Are you really going to leave?" For someone you've never met, Clara turned back, her voice calm. "No, sister." "For myself," Violet sneered, then turned away, her heels clicking on the wooden floor as if emphasizing each sarcasm. But when she was gone, Clara still stood still, looking at the moonlight reflecting on the railway tracks, her heart light as if she had just put down the burden of her life. The next morning, the train arrived. The whistle blew loudly, and a strong wind blew her skirts. She stepped onto the train steps, looking back at the small town, where all the doors were closed, where no one could really see her. The light from the train shone on Clara's face. She smiled slightly, the first smile not for anyone, not because she was trying to be strong, but because she knew that from this moment on, her life belonged to her. "I'm not coming back," she whispered as the train began to roll. Outside, the Missouri prairie receded into distant mountains. Inside the train, a gentle warmth rose, mingling with the steady grinding of iron wheels on the rails, the beat of a heart learning to believe the unbelieved. And so, as the train passed through the first snows of the season, Clara's journey, the woman being made fun of, officially began. But she did not know that. Far away in Montana, there was a man waiting, not for love, but for a promise of respect and a place to belong. That morning, pale sunlight streamed across the small train station in northern Missouri. The wind carried the scent of coal and cold iron, lingering among the old train cars lined up for departure. Clara Wynne, her gray coat frayed at the shoulders, her wooden suitcase clutched tightly, stood in the crowd, silent as a shadow in the crowded picture. The cries of hawkers, the rattling of iron wheels, the train whistle lingering in the cold morning, everything blended into a half-real, half-dreamy sound, the sounds of people leaving, not knowing if they would ever return. She took a deep breath, her hands tightening around the woolen scarf her mother had given her. It was old, the wool slightly frayed at the edges, but the faint scent of sandalwood still lingered. Her mother had said, "If you feel scared, take this handkerchief, no matter how far away. It is still a part of home." Now, home is just a faint memory, but that scarf, along with the old diary and the suitcase, are the only two things Clara carries with her. Two fragile pieces of memory that keep her heart from turning to stone. The train whistled, trailing a trail of white smoke. Clara climbed the steps, her heart pounding in her chest. When the conductor cut her ticket in half and nodded, she turned slightly, watching the small town recede into the mist. No one saw her off, no one watched. Only the bright wind and weak sunlight covered her brown hair, making her look like a lone bright spot among the hazy coal smoke. "I'm not coming back," she whispered. Not a challenge, but a promise. The train began to move. Through the window, the Missouri plains receded, rows of bare trees stretching back toward the horizon. In the distance, the Mississippi River shimmered in the sunlight like a silent silver ribbon. Clara leaned her head against the window, listening to the steady grind of the iron, feeling both afraid and relieved. With every mile, she felt her past fall behind her, every mocking word, every pitying look, every long night of silence. The train passed abandoned farms, bare cornfields, and then a land covered with snow as white as a winter shroud. She had never seen snow so deep. The whiteness was both beautiful and cold, a mirror of what she was leaving behind. An old lady sitting opposite looked at her and smiled gently. "Girl, you came this far. Must be to meet someone." Clara nodded slightly, her voice low as if afraid she would hear herself. "Yes, ma'am. A man from Montana. Mail order bride," she asked, not sarcastically, just with the curiosity of someone who had been through many years. Clara hesitated and then replied, "Yes, maybe so." She smiled, looking out the window. "I used to travel like you, not knowing what I was looking for. It turns out, people don't go looking for others. Girl, they go looking for themselves." Those words lingered in Clara's mind for a long time. The train continued moving forward, leaving all doubts behind. That afternoon, as the train stopped at a small station near the Wyoming border, passengers disembarked. The late afternoon sun cast a coppery glow over the distant mountainsides. Clara stepped out into the corridor, the wind whipping her cheeks and whipping her hair. Out there is the western sky, so vast that it makes people feel small. Mountains and clouds blend together, like a slow invitation step into this new world with an open heart. In the compartment, she opened her diary. Her own scribbles, written the night before she left, appeared. "If this is a mistake, let it be the best mistake of my life. If this is destiny, please give me the courage not to run away." She smiled, folded the paper, and looked out. Steam from the train rolled up like mist, covering the sparse pine trees on the hillside. Night fell, and the train passed through the wild steppe. Outside the window, only the pale moonlight shone on the white snow. Clara sat still, hugging her woolen scarf, listening to the howling wind outside, the wind of an unknown land, both strange and inviting. She missed her mother, the small kitchen, her mother's fingers touching her hair on the morning they parted. But in that longing there was no despair, only gratitude, because without that memory she would have nothing to get through this winter. She gently closed her eyes, letting the train lull her with the sound of its wheels clack, clack, like the heartbeat of someone emerging from an old shell. The next morning, the snow was so thick that when the train stopped, the passengers had to get off in a cloud of white smoke. A conductor shouted, "Yellowstone River. Everyone look to your right. The river is frozen." Clara turned her head, pressing her face against the window. In the distance, the Yellowstone River stretched out like a shimmering silver ribbon, its slow flow between snow-covered banks. The reflections were dazzling. In that moment, Clara felt her heart expand, as if the river not only flowed through the land, but also through her heart, washing away her shame, fear, and forgotten years. She whispered, "I'm not coming back." A slight smile appeared on his lips. Light, but as sure as the ship itself was rushing forward. Ahead lay Montana, where the snows lay deep and the wind sang old prairie songs. It could be hell, or it could be the only place she would ever truly see. But Clara was no longer afraid. She knew that whatever awaited her, she had chosen to go and to live by her heart, not by her fears. And as the train crossed that icy river, Clara had no idea that on the other side, where Montana began, there was a pair of eyes watching, carrying the same loneliness as her own, just waiting to be awakened. The train whistle blew through the Bozeman morning mist. The last snowflakes of the season fluttered down, melting as soon as they hit the ground. The small Darkwood station had a faded sign that read Bozeman Station, Montana Territory. The wind from the Bridger Mountains was sharp and cut into my face. Clara Wynne stepped from the train, clutching her suitcase, the woolen scarf her mother had given her wrapped around her neck. Her breath misted in the cold air. The men on the platform, mostly horsemen, hunters, and a few fur traders, paused to look at her. Their eyes weren't exactly vulgar, just strange. A woman traveling alone on the frontier was unusual. A station master helped her put down her suitcase and asked quietly, "Do you have someone to pick you up?" Miss Clara nodded, her voice trembling. "Yes, Mr. Charles Whitmore. He wrote that he would come today." The station master nodded and pointed toward the end of the platform. There was someone waiting there early. Black horse, thick coat. Must be him. Clara turned to look in the direction indicated, and her heart clenched slightly. Standing beside the snow-covered carriage was a tall man, broad-shouldered, his face gaunt from the sun and wind. His knee-length leather coat was lined with gray sheepskin. Beneath the wide brim of his hat were ash-gray eyes, cold, but not evil, just the look of someone who had grown accustomed to loss. He walked back and stopped in front of her. The wind blew Clara's scarf lightly, revealing her cheeks flushed from the cold. He nodded, his voice low and slightly hoarse. "We'd better get going before sundown." No greeting, no smile, just one simple sentence. But enough for Clara to understand this man lived in a world where extra words were a burden. She nodded slightly. "Yes, sir." As they left town, the wagon wheels made a dry screeching sound on the icy road. Bozeman receded into the distance, giving way to vast prairies dotted with patches of snow. In the distance, the Bridger Mountains rose high, touching the clouds. Clara sat quietly in the back seat, clutching her suitcase, watching the sky turn purple. Charles Whitmore, the man she was to marry, remained silent. He held the reins, sitting upright, his eyes fixed on something invisible. Sometimes, when the car jolted violently, Clara had to hold on to the railing. Her hand brushed the edge of his shirt, cold, but steady. She heard herself say softly, "The land here looks so wide," Charles replied, his eyes still on the road wide, but lonely. "Here, one must learn to listen to the wind instead of human voices." The words were like a gust of wind blowing through her heart, dry yet true. By the time they turned onto the dirt road that led up the hill, the sunset had dyed the sky crimson. The last rays of light fell on the snowy fields, reflecting a soft golden hue. Clara looked over her shoulder at the endless fields, so quiet she could hear her heart beating. She asked softly, "Is your farm far away?" "Not far," he replied, "about 10 miles. Iron Creek Ranch, right on the Iron Creek." Clara smiled slightly. "What a strong name." "I was strong," he said, his voice low, "until the winter 2 years ago took too much." She didn't ask further. There was something in the way he said it, as if he were talking to himself, that made silence seem the only respectful course. It was dusk when they arrived. A wooden house stood in the middle of the prairie, surrounded by a stable, a fence, and a few old pine trees bent by the wind. Thin smoke drifted from the chimney, blending with the early evening. Charles got out and helped her carry her suitcase inside. Inside. The fire crackled in the fireplace, casting warm streaks of light. The smell of pine mixed with the scent of freshly baked bread, a smell that calmed Clara's heart. An elderly woman with silver hair tied in a bun and a kind face stepped out of the kitchen. "Are you Miss Hart? I am Greta Shaw, the housekeeper here. Clara smiled and bowed her head. "Yes, ma'am." Greta looked at her, her eyes gentle. "It's cold. Come closer to the fire. I've prepared a room for you. It's not big, but it has a window overlooking the hills. The boss said you'll like the morning light there." Clara paused. Her grandmother's small words warmed her heart. She didn't expect that the quiet man would notice such a small thing. Her room was at the end of the hall, with dark wood walls and a small bed covered with thick blankets. The windows faced east, where the morning sun would rise. Clara put down her suitcase and sat on the edge of the bed. For the first time in her life, she had a room of her own, not the kitchen corner, not the old porch corner. A small place, but hers. She opened her suitcase and took out her diary and scarf. She placed them on the table under the window. Outside, the wind blew, making the glass panes tremble slightly, like the greeting of a new land. She smiled, not with joy, but with the knowledge that she had truly come far, farther than the past could hold her. Downstairs, Charles stood by the window, watching the snow fall heavily outside. Greta poured coffee and whispered, "That girl seems gentle, doesn't she?" He was silent for a moment, then replied, "She looks like someone who doesn't know how brave she is." Greta smiled, "And you don't know how lonely you are." Charles didn't answer. He just looked out into the distance, where the light from her room cast a faint shadow on the snow, a small one, but brighter than anything else around it. And in that cabin in the middle of windy Montana, two strangers, one with old wounds, one with new fears, began to learn to exist in the same silence. The first few days at Iron Creek Ranch were quiet, as they had been for the past 2 years since Charles's wife, Sarah Whitmore, died. The silence of the mountains, the wind, and memories. Clara Wynne, now known as Evelyn Hart, woke up every morning before sunrise. She lit the stove, helped Greta Shaw knead dough, and went out to the yard to help feed the animals. At first, her hands were clumsy, her skin thin and blistered easily, making Eli Carter, the longtime ranch manager, shake his head. "You've never held a shovel before, have you?" he asked, his voice hoarse but not unpleasant. Evelyn smiled slightly. "I used to only sew, Mr. Carter. Then you will learn to do it differently," he replied, placing a steel broom in her hand. "Here, everyone has their part to play. Do it well and they will respect you. Do it badly and you will only suffer." Those words, simple yet direct, were engraved in her mind, and from that day on, Evelyn began to learn all over again how to sweep the stables, draw water, shovel hay, even saddle a horse. Eli taught her how to talk to them. "Horses are like people," he said. "They hear the truth in their voices." Evelyn put her hand on the brown horse's neck and whispered softly, "I'm not afraid of you. I'm just learning." The horse sneezed, then bowed its head obediently. Eli smiled a rare smile that showed under his silver mustache. At home, Mrs. Greta became Evelyn's first support. She often made her a cup of warm tea every night, telling stories of the years when Montana was still a wilderness. "You know," she said once, "the men here are strong, but also fragile. The wind in this region carries loneliness, and those who live long learn to hide it. Don't be afraid of Mr. Whitmore's silence. Sometimes silence is the way people try not to hurt anyone anymore." Evelyn nodded, her eyes distant. In Charles' silence, she saw not coldness, but the fear of someone who had lost everything. Then, one morning in early spring, just as the snow was melting, a little boy appeared on the porch. His blonde hair was tangled, his cheeks were red, and his eyes were bluer than the Montana sky. He ran to hide behind Charles and asked softly, "Papa, who is that?" Charles paused, as if he had forgotten to introduce himself. Evelyn bowed and smiled gently. "Hello, I am Evelyn." The boy looked at her for a moment, then tilted his head. "Can I call you Mama Clara? Papa said I used to have a mama, but now I don't. No one said anything." A gentle wind blew, carrying with it the rustling of the pine trees. Evelyn bowed her head slightly, her voice choked but still gentle. "Yes, Tommy, if you want." From that day on, 5-year-old Tommy Whitmore became a small light in the house that was too dark. He followed her everywhere, from the kitchen to the yard, from the stable to the pasture. Every time he fell, he smiled and said, "Mama Clara, I'm not hurt," leaving Evelyn not knowing whether to laugh or cry. But Montana is not a land of kindness. Evelyn soon learned that when she went to the market in the town of Silver Creek, the local women, as she passed, smiled indifferently, and a few men whispered mail-order bride, probably just for the money. Mr. Whitmore must still be missing his ex-wife. Women like that are clingy. Evelyn heard everything, but did not reply. She just bowed her head, bought the goods, and then turned back. Only when she was sitting in the carriage did she realize that her hands were shaking slightly. Across the street, Lucille Grant, the widow who owned the small farm near Iron Creek, leaned against a porch pillar. Her face was beautiful and haughty, and her gaze on Evelyn was unmistakable contempt and challenge. "She's the kind of woman who would sully the Whitmore name," Lucille said to her companion. "A cheap letter doesn't make a lady." Evelyn turned away, her heart sinking. But that evening, when she came home and saw Tommy drawing a house with charcoal on a piece of paper, with 3 people in it, her, the boy, and Charles, all the whispers suddenly faded away. She worked tirelessly. She was up first each day and went to bed last. She helped Greta with the food and cleaned up the farm's ledgers, which had not been touched since Sarah's death. She had a head for business. Eli told Charles she was very organized. It's been a long time since Iron Creek had such neat records. Charles just nodded, looking out onto the porch where Evelyn was teaching Tommy how to hammer a fence. The wind whipped her hair around her tanned face. He felt a sudden calm, as if the storm inside had stopped. One afternoon, it was raining lightly. Evelyn was helping Greta pull the blankets off the clothesline when Lucille appeared. "You're a hard worker, Miss Hart," Lucille said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Not everyone can handle Montana winds like you." Evelyn smiled, trying to keep her voice light. "Thank you. The wind here isn't too bad. You just have to know how to stand firm." Lucille smiled faintly. "That's right. But you know, everyone here remembers Sarah. She was the woman no one could replace." Having said that, she turned away, leaving Evelyn standing alone in the drizzling rain. The raindrops mixed with the cold air gradually seeped into her clothes, but she didn't feel cold, only a vague sadness, both painful and peaceful. She understood. She didn't need to replace anyone. She just needed to be herself, that night in her small room. Evelyn opened her diary. The words she wrote trembled in the candlelight. "People may doubt me, may consider me a joke, but here, for the first time in my life, I am called by a name of my own choosing." She closed the page and blew out the candle. Outside, the wind rose again, But this time, she was not afraid, because she knew she was no longer alone. And then, between successive snow seasons, silence gradually turns to understanding. But as the heart begins to open, the past begins to return, like darkness returning to light. Winter came early that year. The snow was so deep that the road from Iron Creek Ranch down to Silver Creek almost disappeared into the white. The wind whistled around the wooden roof and through the cracks, bringing with it a chill that bit right to the bone. Inside, the fire burned low in the hearth, casting flickering spots of light on the walls. Evelyn, as everyone in Montana called her, sat sewing Tommy's shirt. He dozed in a chair, breathing evenly and softly. Outside, the wind sounded like a distant call, making it hard to tell which was natural and which was heartfelt. Charles entered, brushing the snow off his shoulders. He held an old picture frame in his hand. He tried to hide it, but Evelyn saw it, a picture of a young woman, soft-faced, bright-eyed, holding a newborn baby. Faded writing below the frame read, "Sarah and Tommy, 1885. Evelyn paused. A different chill, not from the wind, crept into her heart. She asked softly, her voice low, "Is that—" Your wife Charles was silent for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, Sarah." He turned away, his voice cracking. "She died giving birth to Tommy. I never got to say goodbye." The room was filled with silence. Evelyn bowed her head, her hands trembling slightly. She understood that the pain did not belong to her, and no one could replace it. But deep in her heart, there was still a small cut, the feeling that she was just a passer-by in a story that had already ended. The next day, the snow was so deep that it was impossible to go outside. The wind was blowing so hard that it seemed as if it would knock the house down. Greta and Eli tended the firewood, while Evelyn checked on the horses in the stables. She was afraid the horses would get cold. Charles came along, holding a lantern. They walked through the knee-deep snow, their breath turning to white smoke. When they opened the barn door, the wind blew hard, the lantern swayed, and the golden light fell on their faces tired. But still, inside, the horses were shivering. Evelyn immediately spread more straw, covered them with blankets, and stroked their necks. Her touch was so gentle that Charles could only watch, speechless. "You can go out. I can take care of it," she said, her voice still soft. Charles shook his head. "The wind is too strong. The barn door is broken. If we don't keep watch, the wind will blow it down." And so they stayed. The wind howled. The snow pounded against the roof, growing heavier, making the stable shake. The light faded, leaving only the warmth of a small fire in an iron bucket. Evelyn sat hunched over, rubbing her hands. Charles saw and took off his coat to drape it over her shoulders. "You'll be cold," he said. She looked up, her eyes shining in the light. "What about you?" He smiled slightly, the first she'd seen from him since arriving in Iron Creek. "I'm used to it. In this part of the world, people learn to bear the cold or not feel it at all." Evelyn was silent for a moment, then asked softly, "You once said Sarah was the one you loved the most. Have you ever thought that you would love again?" Charles bowed his head, the golden light illuminating his face hard and sad. "No," he said softly. "I told myself I would never love again, because love makes people weak, and loss kills them." She looked at him for a long time, then replied in a voice so soft it was almost like the wind. "Then perhaps love just took a different shape." Charles looked up. Their eyes met in the firelight, no longer those of strangers, but of two souls touched by each other's loneliness. He said nothing, just looked at her for a long time. Outside, the blizzard was still howling, but in the stable, the air was strangely quiet. The breathing of the horses, the sound of the wind mixed with the warmth of two people who had once closed their hearts. That night, they didn't sleep. They talked not about love, but about simple things, about Tommy's love of pumpkin pie, about Greta singing lullabies while baking, about Eli saving a wounded wolf cub. These seemingly small things, in the snowstorm, had a strange warmth. As Evelyn recounted her childhood memories of the Missouri fields, Charles whispered, "Sarah wanted to plant flowers here, too, but she died before spring." Evelyn looked at him. "Then perhaps you should let someone plant it for her?" Charles didn't answer, but his eyes softened. For the first time in years, something inside him melted. Something he had thought had turned to stone. When the storm passed, the sky was clear. The morning light shone into the stables, shining on the melted snow like crystal. Evelyn stepped out, breathing in the fresh and cold air. Charles followed behind, silent, but something in his steps had changed lighter, less closed off. He still held the framed photo of Sarah in his hand. Evelyn looked, but this time without pain. Charles placed the photo frame on the windowsill, where the light shone directly, and said, "Sarah is the past, but this light, perhaps she would want me to leave it to someone else." Evelyn smiled a small smile, but real. "Perhaps she is still looking at you from a warmer place." He nodded, and in that moment the wind across the prairie softened, as if Montana herself were smiling a tired but kind smile. After that snowstorm, no more talk of love was said between them. But every look, every silence between them became different. However, fate still tested them once more, when danger came to Iron Creek Ranch from an unexpected place. Spring came, bringing the first warm sunshine melting the snow. On Iron Creek Ranch, new grass sprouted, sparrows began nesting under the eaves. Life seemed peaceful again, but peace on the frontier was always as fragile as morning dew. From the town of Silver Creek, rumors began to spread on the wind. "The new bride is just Sarah's replacement," he said. Mr. Whitmore only pitied her. At first, Evelyn ignored it. But when Tommy came home with sad eyes, he asked Mama Clara, "People say I shouldn't call you that because you're not really mine. Is that true?" She stood still. Her hand paused in midair. Then she knelt down and placed her hand on her son's shoulder. "People can say whatever they want, Tommy, but what you call me is what I will keep for the rest of my life." The boy hugged her neck, sobbing. Outside the door, Charles heard everything but did not enter. His face was tense with anger and helplessness. He had thought the past could be put to rest. But this small town never let anyone forget. A week later, Lucille Grant visited the farm. Her perfume overpowered the scent of hay. Her voice was honeyed, but there were thorns underneath. "I hear she taught your son to ride." How brave or how reckless. City women are not accustomed to frontier horses. Evelyn only responded with a small smile, but behind her she heard Lucille say to Charles, "You're letting someone else live in Sarah's shadow. Be careful. Charles, people are talking." Charles was silent, but in Evelyn's heart, each word fell like a stone. A few days later, the first storm of the season suddenly hit. The sky darkened, the wind howled, and snow whipped up into a blinding whiteout. Tommy and Evelyn were cleaning the horses in the stable when Lucille appeared, telling the boy she had a present to show him near the stream. Tommy hesitated, but Lucille smiled and took his hand, pulling him away. Evelyn didn't notice until she returned that the stable was empty. Tommy, she called. No answer. Her heart clenched. The wind blew open the door, and the snow began to fall deeper. Evelyn rushed outside without time to put on her coat. The wind was muffled by her breathing, but in the Watt she saw small footprints leading to the wooden bridge over Iron Creek. On the bridge, Tommy stood precariously, with a panicked Lucille on the other side. The wind blew so hard that the bridge creaked. "Tommy, don't be afraid. Come slowly towards me," Evelyn shouted, her voice muffled by the wind. The boy took a step, then slipped. Without thinking, she rushed forward. The bridge swayed violently, but she caught the boy before they both fell. One hand held the child, the other held on, the wind stinging her face. Lucille screamed, backing away, not daring to come closer. "The bridge is about to collapse." "Clara, back off," Evelyn shouted. "Don't come any closer." She used all her strength to pull Tommy up. The plank cracked, and the bridge behind her crashed into the icy stream. She was cold and wet. Her heart was pounding. But when Tommy hugged her tightly, all she could do was cry. Charles rode up with Eli. He got off his horse, ran over, and pulled the mother and child off the collapsed bridge. His face was pale, his voice hoarse from the wind. "What do you think you're doing? Do you know what will happen if you fall?" Evelyn shivered, not from cold, but from anger. Anger at being scolded for saving the child. Anger that he didn't understand. "If I fall, at least Tommy lives," she cried. "Do you think I'm afraid of dying? I'm afraid of not seeing someone who really needs me more." Charles was speechless. He had never seen her like this before. Her eyes were watery, but bright and strong. She choked and continued, "I'd rather die saving your son than live being unseen." The words stabbed Charles deeper than any knife. He started to step forward, but Evelyn stepped back. She hugged Tommy and walked away, a small figure in the dying storm. That night, no one slept in the room. Evelyn sat warming Tommy, looking at the small wound on his hand. Tears fell silently onto her palm, melting like snow. Downstairs, Charles sat alone by the fire. The wind whistled through the crack in the door, but it was not as cold as the feeling in his chest. Greta came and put her hand on her master's shoulder. He had saved many people from death, but today, someone had just saved him from himself. Charles looked up. His eyes were heavy. He knew what hurt him wasn't the fear of losing her. It was the realization that he had loved her all along. The next morning, the sky was clear, the snow had melted, and Iron Creek shone like silver. Evelyn stepped out onto the porch and saw Charles tying up a fallen fence. He looked at her, but did not come closer. He spoke softly, his voice low but sincere. "Thank you for saving Tommy." Evelyn bowed her head, not answering. She knew there was a new distance between them, no longer cold, but filled with fear. Because when people have lost, they're afraid to be loved again. Everything seemed calm after the storm, but that silence was just a breath before the big storm. Because sometimes, love is only truly recognized when people think they're about to lose each other forever. In the days after the storm, Iron Creek Ranch was a sad place. The snow had melted, but the sky was as dull as the human heart. Evelyn worked less. her eyes often looking far away at the snow-capped mountains, where the clouds drifted slowly like memories. She still cared for Tommy, still cooked with Greta, still kept the books, but something inside her was off like a dying lamp. Charles was quieter than ever. He tried to find a way to speak, but every time their eyes met, there was only an indescribable distance, if there had been any affection. It was now like warm ashes in a stove not quite cold, but no one dared to touch. One afternoon, Evelyn walked into the living room and found Charles talking to a strange man, Martin Hale, a Silver Creek landowner who had repeatedly offered to buy Iron Creek. His voice was hoarse and firm. "You can't keep this land forever. Whitmore, you lost 30 cows last winter, and the dry season is coming and the stream will dry up. Sell it and make a better living." Charles replied coldly, "Iron Creek is my home. I'm not selling." Hale shrugged. "Whatever you like, but you know the rules. When the bank comes due, I'll be the first to make a bid. You can keep your honor, but honor can't buy hay." Evelyn stood silently in the doorway, her heart sinking. She knew if Charles lost his land, everything he had tried to protect his wife's memory, Tommy's home, everything would be gone. That night, she did not sleep. Her small room was dimly lit by candlelight. She sat and wrote, each handwriting shaky but clear, to Charles and Tommy. "I came here as a joke, but found something I never knew: courage. You taught me that silence can also contain kindness. And a child taught me that love does not need blood. I don't know what my future holds, but I do know you don't need someone like me to keep Sarah's memory alive. You need someone who believes in themselves. And now, I've learned that. Let me go, like you learned to let go of the past. Evelyn." She folded the letter and placed it on the table, next to the scarf her mother had given her when she left Missouri. Before dawn, Evelyn went to the stables, intending to prepare the carriage to leave. But as she reached the porch, she heard a quarrel. Charles's voice, full of anger. "I won't sign it. Hale, I told you. I won't sell this land." Hale replied sharply, "You're trying to keep a dead farm alive. When the drought comes, you will be begging. Don't let pride bury your family." Evelyn walked in without thinking. If you really want to buy Iron Creek, why not make it worth it? The two men turned back. Surprised? She stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Hale, if you want this land, help us supply water from the northern stream. In return, you can use the road through this land to transport livestock. We both live together, and no one loses." Hale sneered. "A male-bought bride teaching me business." Evelyn looked straight at him, her eyes shining like steel. A woman who was once laughed at and still dared to come to this borderland. "Do you think I don't understand the price of land?" The room was silent. Only the wind whistled through the cracks in the door. Hale frowned, then spoke slowly. "I will think about it. I will come back in 3 days." And he left. Charles stood still, looking at Evelyn. You just saved my farm." She smiled sadly. "No, I only saved what you loved. As for me, I'm done here." He was about to step forward, but she stepped back, her voice choked and soft. "If I stay, I will become Sarah's shadow. I don't want you to look at me with 2 eyes, one of the past and one of the present." She finished speaking and turned away. Charles did not hold her back. Perhaps he understood that love is sometimes not about holding on, but about letting the other person be free to find themselves. Before leaving, Evelyn went to check on Tommy. He was still sleeping, his face peaceful, his blonde hair tangled in the weak dawn light. She leaned down, kissed his forehead gently, and whispered, "Be strong. Tommy, you teach me more than I ever thought possible." She stepped outside. The eastern sky was pink. The horse's hooves clopped on the cold ground. She climbed into the carriage, gripping the reins tightly, not looking back. In the distance, Charles stood on the doorstep, watching the car disappear behind the mountains. He did not call out, did not run after it, but as the wind blew, a small piece of woolen scarf flew out of Evelyn's pocket and fell into the snow. He picked it up and held it in his hand. The warmth lingered. And then, 3 days later, when Martin Hale returned with an agreement not to take, but to build, Charles understood the full significance of what she had left. But by then, Evelyn was gone, and Montana began to miss a woman who carried spring in her heart. 3 days, just 3 days, and Iron Creek Ranch seemed to lose its breath. Charles stepped out onto the porch each morning and looked out at the white dust road stretching to the horizon. Only the dried wagon tracks remained, sparkling in the early summer sun. Greta said to him, "Master, there are people who come not to stay, but to awaken something in their hearts." Charles was silent, but in those pale gray eyes, a light was returning, weak but real. He knew that if he let her go like that, he would have to live the rest of his life in silence, like before. And this time, he couldn't bear it any more. Early on the 4th morning, Charles rode out of the ranch. Eli called after him, "Boss, she's headed for Red Creek Station. If you're lucky, you can catch the noon train." The early morning wind blew cold across the steppe. Silver clouds stretched like old wool over the distant mountains. Charles bent low and urged his horse along the trail. Each hooves echoed his heartbeat heavy, heavy, and suddenly panicked as he realized time was running out. Red Creek Station was a small town, with only a few wooden houses and a quiet train station. A light snow still lay all around, and the wind blew fiercely, carrying the smell of smoke and the distant sound of train whistles. Evelyn sat in the small waiting room, crumpled ticket in hand. Outside the window, the train was about to roll south to St. Louis, where she planned to start her life over. She looked into the frosted mirror on the wall, a young woman, her brown hair streaked with frost, her eyes tired but calm. In her heart, she whispered, "I came. I loved, and I had the courage to leave." But when the train whistle blew, something caught in her chest, a nameless void. She didn't know if it was regret or hope. The sound of horse hooves echoed in the wind. Everyone turned to see a man riding across the platform, his cloak covered in snow, his eyes blazing like fire. He jumped off and ran straight towards the woman standing with her suitcase in her hand. Evelyn, his voice was hoarse, but clear enough to be heard over the noise of the train. She turned. In that moment, all sound faded away, only the beating of her heart remained. Charles stopped before her, breathing heavily, snow covering his shoulders, his gray eyes deeper and warmer than ever. "I should have come sooner," he said, his voice a mixture of trepidation and determination. "But there are some things a man only understands when he has nearly lost them." Evelyn clutched her suitcase, trying to stay calm. "You don't need to come. Everything is clear." Charles shook his head slightly. "No, not yet. I used to think you were a mistake, that your presence only reminded me of what I had lost. But in the past 3 days, I have come to understand the opposite." He took a step forward, his eyes never leaving her. You weren't a mistake. You're the reason I started to live again." Evelyn stood still, tears streaming down her face without a chance to wipe them away. She spoke softly, as if afraid her words would be lost in the wind. "Charles, I don't want you to say that just out of pity." He smiled, a real smile, warm, tired and sincere. "I lived for years without feeling anything, until you came along, bringing with you the courage I had lost. If that isn't love, then what is?" She gently put down her suitcase, took a step forward, her eyes trembling. "I just know that. You made me believe in myself, and I was afraid that if I stayed, I would lose that again." Charles reached out and took her hand, cold, small, but trembling in his. "Evelyn, love doesn't mean losing. Love is living together, even though the past is still there, outside." The snow began to fall. Large, soft flakes touched her hair, melting in the warmth of his hand. The whistle blew one last time. The train slowly rolled away, its long, final whistle a farewell. Evelyn looked after him, then back. In the dim light of the Red Creek afternoon, she saw that Charles's eyes were no longer as cold as the first day they met. There was pain, loss, and a new beginning. She smiled, a small smile that melted all winter. Then, "Let's live together, Charles." He said nothing more. He just pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, as if afraid that if he let go, she would disappear with the wind and snow. They stood like that, in the middle of the train station covered in white mist, with the sound of iron wheels grinding against the rails, and their warm breaths intertwined. No need for promises, no need for a clear future, just two people who were once lost, now finding each other at the edge of the world. As the train disappeared behind the mountains, the snow was still falling, but the wind had died down. Red Creek Station suddenly became quiet, as if time had stopped just to preserve that moment, where a man found his heart again, and a woman found her faith again. That spring, Montana's first wildflowers bloomed around Iron Creek Ranch, and in a small cabin on the prairie, a woman's laughter mixed with a child's voice, soft as the wind, but enough to warm the cold land. A year later, Iron Creek Ranch had been transformed. Green pastures stretched to the mountainside, where Iron Creek wound like a silver ribbon through the meadow. Foals ran freely around the yard, and the new stables gleamed in the sun. On the porch, Evelyn, now Evelyn Whitmore, sat, writing in her ledger, a quill in hand, glancing out at the field where Charles and Eli were working. Her hair was longer than before, tied back with a blue ribbon, and her smile was warm and ripe as autumn fruit. A sack of oats, 3 barrels of salt, 2 rolls of wire, she mumbled, her handwriting neat and even. Beside her, Tommy, now 6, sat practicing his writing, head tilted, lips pursed in concentration. "Mama Evelyn is my R, like your father's. It's almost," she smiled, gently adjusting his hand. "But your father writes a little harder because he's more used to holding a rein than a pen." The boy laughed heartily. His laughter wafted up with the smell of hay and baked goods from the kitchen, touching the hearts of everyone in the house like a blessing. In the stable, Charles stood beside Eli, looking toward the backyard where Evelyn and Tommy sat. He spoke softly, as if to himself. "She makes this house different. Eli, everything comes alive." Eli smiled, his old eyes shining with kindness. "I've seen him survive 3 winters without a word of humor." Now, hearing the laughter from the kitchen, "I know Iron Creek has more than a roof. It has a heart." Charles nodded. He thought back to her time there, from a quiet, frightened woman to a steady companion. They didn't talk much about love, but it was there in the little things: the warm light of dinner, the touch of hands as they lifted the wooden plank, the glances given without asking for thanks. That afternoon, a gentle wind blew across the fields. Evelyn brought home a basket of wildflowers and placed it on the table. She said, half jokingly, "I think we should plant some flowers around the fence. Yellow will make this place less lonely." Charles looked up, his eyes smiling. "I thought this place wasn't lonely anymore." Evelyn blushed slightly, but smiled. Then, "Let the flowers grow for the days when you go to the fields early and I don't have time to say hello." The sentence was gentle, but enough to make Charles's heart tremble. He walked over, put his hand on her shoulder, and said softly, "I didn't know what spring smelled like until you smiled." Evelyn was silent, bowed her head, and looked out the window, where the sunset was dyeing the prairie golden. She softly replied, "And I didn't know what home was until I heard you call my name." In the evening, everyone gathered around the kitchen. Greta poured tea, smiling as she watched the two of them argue softly about buying more cows or building a new barn. "The house finally sounds alive again," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. The table was silent for a moment. Then everyone laughed. Evelyn touched Charles lightly on the arm, without saying anything else. In that moment, all the pain and loss of the past year seemed to melt away. Night fell outside. The wind rustled through the eaves in his room. Charles sat rereading Evelyn's notes. June expenses: bought new stallions. 4. Lost one calf, but got the best forage crop since Sarah passed away. Iron Creek, finally alive again. He looked up at the window where Evelyn was rocking Tommy to sleep, softly singing a Missouri lullaby. Her voice was thin, but heartwarming. He closed the book and said softly to himself, and me too. The next morning the sun was shining on the hill. Evelyn opened the window and saw Tommy running after his father in the yard, holding a bouquet of daisies. "Mama, Dad said we should go out to the fields today. Don't forget your hat," she called after him. The boy smiled and waved. Evelyn watched, a rare sense of peace rising in her. She remembered the day she left Missouri, the frail, tear-eyed girl in the old train car. And now, in this harsh land, she had found not only love, but herself. In the afternoon, as the sun set behind the mountains, the family sat on the porch. Charles told stories of past winters. Evelyn listened and laughed, and Tommy fell asleep in his mother's arms. No more farewell letters, no more rumors, just breathing, touching hands, and the sound of crickets in the quiet night. The wind from the mountains brought the scent of fresh grass. Evelyn gently rested her head on her husband's shoulder. Charles put his arm around her and squeezed gently. No one said anything, because sometimes happiness doesn't need to be spoken, it just needs to be lived in silence, like the step after the rain. It was later said that Iron Creek Ranch was saved by a woman who came with a letter with the wrong name. But Charles Whitmore just smiled and said softly, "It's not wrong. God knows who we need, even when we don't know ourselves." Spring mornings at Iron Creek Ranch always begin with soft light spreading across the prairie. Dew drops on the grass blades resemble pearls, reflecting the delicate blue sky. Larks sing in the fence, and the smell of coffee wafts from the kitchen onto the porch. In the small room by the east window, Evelyn sat at her oak desk. A breeze stirred the white curtains, stirring the paper in the glass frame before her, the first letter Charles had ever sent. The words were faded with age, but still legible. I'm not a romantic man, but I can offer you security, respect, and a place to belong. Evelyn stared at the paper for a long time. Her hand gently touched the wooden frame, her fingers tracing each letter as if touching the very beginning of her life. Below the frame, she added a small line in brown ink. Not a romantic man, but a man who learned to love. She smiled softly. Not a victorious smile, but the smile of someone finally at peace with herself. Outside, Tommy, now 7, played with his little brown dog. His laughter echoed across the meadow, clear as a spring stream. Charles stood on the porch, a cup of coffee in his hand, his eyes following his son, then stopping at the woman by the window. He walked over, stood behind, and silently looked at the letter frame. "I still have it," he whispered. "Yes," Evelyn replied, her voice soft as a breath. "The first letter and the one where I found myself." Charles smiled, putting his hand on his wife's shoulder. "If I were to rewrite it, I would probably replace the word respect with love." She tilted her head slightly and took his hand. "I like it better the way it was, because it's true. I didn't promise to love you, but I've learned to do it slowly, sincerely, and completely." Light flooded the room. Evelyn rose and followed Charles onto the porch. The wind blew from the distant mountains, carrying the scent of new grass and damp earth. In the distance, horses trotted down the hillsides. The Montana sky stretched like a pale blue sheet to the horizon. "You know," Evelyn said softly, "sometimes I think back if Violet hadn't sent that letter by mistake that day. I might still be sitting in Missouri, sewing under a cold roof, and you're probably still talking to the past," Charles replied. They laughed together, not out loud, just a look, a sigh mingled together. Years of loss, old pain seemed to melt away in that moment. Tommy ran over, holding a yellow flower he had picked from the field. "Mama." I found the first yellow flower. Evelyn bent down and took the small flower. The petals were delicate, slightly tilted by the wind, but as bright yellow as the sun. She pinned it to her breast and said softly, "Thank you, my child. It is as beautiful as this morning." Charles looked at mother and child, his eyes shining with quiet warmth, the kind of happiness that the borderman could only wish for in silence. The imaginary camera slowly moves out from the wooden porch, where thin smoke from the stove rises to the sky, across the golden fields, where Tommy runs after his little dog. Laughter ringing like a song, then stops on the vast prairie scene, Iron Creek Ranch in the heart of Montana. A gentle streak of light in the harsh nature. In the rustling wind and the spreading sunlight, the narrator's voice resounded, deep, warm, like a whisper to the listener. No one is ugly who dares to believe they are worthy of love. No one is worthless who learns to see themselves, not through the eyes of others, but through courage. And sometimes a letter with the wrong name is God's way of writing the story we need. Final scene. Evelyn stands on the porch, looking out at the distant mountains where the snow melts in the sunlight. The light washes over her brown hair, making it shimmer like honey. She smiles slightly, a smile no longer of the past, but of the confidence of someone who has lived, loved, and seen. The camera pulls back even further. The small wooden house disappears into the sea of yellow grass, where the wind sweeps away all laughter, all memories, leaving only gentle silence. A small sign appears at the ranch gate, Iron Creek Ranch Est. 1888 home is where love learns to stay. The story they sent the ugly daughter as a mail-order bride joke. The wealthy rancher found his perfect match is not only a love song on the harsh frontier, but also a gentle reminder of human values that sometimes the most beautiful things come not from the outside, but from the resilience and kindness within. Evelyn, once considered ugly and made fun of, proves that a brave heart can change a life. She didn't come to Iron Creek looking for love, she just looked for a place where she could be truly seen. But it was her honesty, devotion, and quiet faith that helped a man who seemed unlovable learn to open up again. In our lives today, we may all be like Evelyn, feeling inadequate, unworthy, or judged by others. But this story reminds us when we choose to be kind, when we dare to believe we are worthy of love, that is when our lives begin to change. If you felt the warmth of this story, if it touched a part of your heart, please hit like, share this video with someone who needs faith, and subscribe to the channel to continue our journey of telling stories of human kindness, love, and resurrection. Thank you for listening, and may you always find your own Iron Creek, where your heart is at peace and seen.